You wake up in the middle of the night. No alarm went off. Nothing is wrong. Your eyes just open, and for a few minutes, you lie there in the dark, awake, calm, unbothered. Then you drift back off. For most of human history, this wasn't insomnia. This was Tuesday. For roughly 300,000 years, your ancestors had no clocks, no nightlights, no notifications buzzing at 2 a.m. And yet they slept. They woke up. They raised children, hunted animals, and built entire societies without a single alarm clock between them. So how did that actually work? How did the human body know when to sleep, when to wake, and when it was simply okay to lie awake in the dark and not panic about it? The answer isn't that ancient humans had some superhuman internal clock you've lost. The answer is that your body still has that clock. It's just been buried under 100 years of artificial light. Start with the obvious assumption. No alarms means no structure. Chaos. People sleeping whenever, however, for however long their bodies felt like. But that's not what the evidence shows. In 2015, a neuroscientist named Jerome Siegel ran an experiment that nobody had really done properly before. He strapped sleep-tracking devices onto the wrists of people in 3 different traditional societies that still live largely without electricity: the Hadza of Tanzania, the San of Namibia, and the Tsimane of Bolivia. 3 different continents, 3 unrelated cultures. None of them had ever heard a phrase like sleep hygiene. For over 1,000 nights combined, his team measured exactly when these people fell asleep, when they woke up, and how long they stayed under for. And the results broke a myth that almost everyone still believes. People in these groups slept, on average, about 6.5 hours a night. Not 9, not 10, 6.5. That's roughly the same as the average person sleeping in a city apartment with blackout curtains and a phone on the nightstand. Here's the part that should surprise you more. They didn't fall asleep at sunset. On average, they stayed awake for over 3 hours after the sun went down, sitting by firelight, talking, eating, just existing in the dark together. Sleep wasn't triggered by darkness alone. It was triggered by a drop in temperature. As the night cooled, their bodies wound down on their own, with no clock telling them to. Siegel's team confirmed this by tracking body temperature alongside sleep timing. Sleep onset lined up almost perfectly with the steepest part of the nightly temperature drop, not with the moment the sun disappeared. Wake-up time lined up with the coldest point of the night, just before sunrise, when temperatures had bottomed out and were about to climb again. The body, in other words, was reading the air, not the sky. And there's another detail buried in that data that quietly demolishes a piece of modern self-diagnosis. None of the 3 groups reported insomnia. Not occasionally. Not at all. When researchers tried to explain the concept to the San and the Tsimane, translators struggled because there wasn't really a word for it in either language. People in these groups sometimes lay awake at night. They just didn't experience lying awake as a problem to be solved. It was simply part of being a person in the dark. So if it wasn't a clock, an alarm, or anxiety about getting enough hours, what was actually running the schedule? Picture a single day, 50,000 years ago. Somewhere in a savanna at dusk. The light is fading to orange. A small group sits around a fire they built hours ago. There's no debate about bedtime. There's no one checking a screen. As the air gets colder, conversation gets quieter. One person yawns. Within an hour, most of the group is lying down, some on woven leaves, some directly on the ground, often pressed close to a partner, a child, a parent, for warmth and safety. There was rarely such a thing as sleeping completely alone. Anthropologist Carol Worthman, who has spent decades studying sleep across cultures, found that in most traditional societies, multiple generations slept on the same surface, in the same room, sometimes the same 6-by-6-foot hut. A grandmother, 2 parents, a baby, a toddler, maybe a dog, all breathing in the same dark space. That detail matters more than it sounds like it should. Because it means ancient sleep wasn't private. It was social. Waking up in the night wasn't frightening, because you were never really alone in the first place. Now here's the twist that changes how you should think about your own sleep. Long before electric light existed, Historian Roger Akirch dug through centuries of diaries, court records, and medical texts from pre-industrial Europe and found something strange. People back then didn't sleep in one continuous block either. They had what's called segmented sleep, a first sleep that started a couple hours after dark, then a period of quiet wakefulness in the middle of the night that could last an hour or more, then a second sleep until morning. During that middle window, people didn't panic. They got up, stoked the fire, talked, had sex, prayed, or just lay there thinking. There are old letters that casually mention things happening between the sleeps, as if everyone already understood what that meant. Akirch traced this pattern across hundreds of historical sources spanning several centuries, and it shows up again and again in different countries, different classes, different climates. It wasn't a quirk of one culture. It looked, increasingly, like a default setting for the species, one that simply got switched off sometime in the 1800s, right around when cheap artificial lighting started keeping households awake well past dark and compressing two natural sleeps into one forced block. So that 2 a.m. wake-up you've had, the one that makes you reach for your phone and start spiraling about insomnia. Your great-great-great-grandparents had a name for that. They just didn't think it was broken. This is where the agriculture twist comes in, because it's not the part you'd expect. You'd think farming, with its sunrise to sunset labor, made sleep more disciplined. In some ways, it did, but it also introduced something hunter-gatherers rarely had to deal with: a hard external deadline. Crops don't care if your body wants to wake up later today. Livestock need tending on a fixed schedule, every day, regardless of how you slept the night before. For the first time, large numbers of humans had to override their own internal signals to match an external clock. The modern alarm didn't start with electricity. It started with crops. Industrialization just finished the job. Gas lighting, then electric lighting, pushed bedtimes later and later, while work schedules stayed early. The result is a species that evolved to wind down with the temperature drop of evening, now sitting in rooms held at a constant 70 degrees, lit by screens that mimic midday sun, expected to fall asleep on command at 11 p.m. and be alert by 6. So why does this matter for you, lying in bed tonight scrolling instead of sleeping? Because the things that actually regulated sleep for 300,000 years weren't mysterious. They were temperature, darkness, and social safety. Your ancestors didn't need a sleep schedule because their environment was the schedule. The fire died down, the air cooled, the people around them grew quiet, and their bodies responded the way bodies have responded for almost the entire history of this species. Now compare that to your bedroom tonight. The thermostat is probably holding steady at a temperature your ancestors would never have slept through, somewhere around 70 degrees with no nightly dip to signal wind down now. Your phone screen, even on a dim setting, emits more light than a small fire, and it emits it directly into your eyes from a foot away, telling your brain it's still daytime. And unlike a hut with 4 other warm bodies breathing nearby, you may be sleeping in total isolation, in total silence, which research on co-sleeping suggests is itself a relatively recent and unusual arrangement for a species that spent almost its entire existence sleeping in groups. None of this means you need to sleep on the floor next to a campfire with 3 relatives, but it does explain why so many of the modern remedies for poor sleep are really just attempts to recreate conditions your body expects by default. Lowering the thermostat a few degrees before bed isn't a wellness trend. It's restoring the temperature drop your nervous system was built to respond to. Dimming the lights an hour before bed isn't aesthetic. It's removing the false daylight signal that never existed for 300,000 years of human evolution. And if you wake up at 2 a.m. and just lie there for 20 minutes without reaching for your phone, you're not broken. You're doing something humans have done for almost the entirety of their existence, something with a name in pre-industrial Europe, and no name at all in the Kalahari, because it simply wasn't considered unusual enough to need one. You still have that system. It's just drowned out by a lamp that never dims, a thermostat that never drops, and a silence that, for the first time in human history, is something we experience completely alone. You wake up in the middle of the night. No alarm went off. Nothing is wrong. For 300,000 years, that was never something to fear. Maybe it still isn't.